Have you ever been in a situation where you felt backed into a corner and you weren't sure what to do? Like either emotionally or physically or financially or spiritually. Have you ever been backed into a corner, backed up against the wall, and you're like, I'm not quite sure what to do with this? When I graduated high school, it was pretty common for my friends and I to go to Canada, and people tend to forget how close Canada and Detroit actually is. Let me just quickly show a map so that we know what we're talking about. So I was born and raised in Detroit, and as a quick aside, you all know the band Journey, right? Like they were Nickelback of the 80s, like just they talk about, we'll move on. Born and raised in South Detroit. There's a little PSA, there is no South Detroit. That's called Canada. And so we used to go to Canada a lot, the really exotic land of Windsor. And I remember one day we were going to meet some friends, and I was in the back seat, and my buddy Aaron was driving, and my buddy Mike was in the passenger seat. Now, Aaron was a film student, and so his car was full of all of these, like, props and costumes, and his car was a mess. And so we were driving to the Canada side of the border, and the border policeman there was, he looked at the back of the car and was like, no, your car is way too messy. You need to go back to the American side, clean it up, and then try again. So we turn around and we drive, and what we think is going to be like a quick exchange on the United States side, like, hey, they just talked to us, and we tried to like kind of skirt on past, and the guy was really stern with us and said, I'll let you know when you can pass. So, all right, so the blood pressure's already kind of elevated, so we're sitting in this car, and a couple minutes pass, and then they're pulling my friend Mike out of the car by force. And that's when we discovered that Mike has not one but two warrants out for his arrest that we were not aware of. So now there's a lot of attention on our car. And so my buddy Aaron's driving, I probably shouldn't be giving their real names, and I'm in the back seat. And a reminder, so Aaron's at film school, and he turns to me and whispers, I have a prop gun under my seat. And I was like, Aaron, you have to tell them that. Like, we're at the border. So Aaron does that, but I didn't think to actually explain how he should do that. At the same time Aaron is shouting, I have a gun, he's reaching for the gun. At this point now, we are surrounded by policemen, some with guns drawn, and I won't tell you the rest of the story, at least not in this environment. But have you ever been in a situation where you felt backed up against the wall? I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how we're going to get through this. If you have a memory or a situation like that in your life, I want you to kind of think about that and hold on to that for a moment. Is it a situation? Was it a situation? Was it someone that you just could never see yourself actually forgiving? Was it a diagnosis? Was it something different? Today's story, Jesus is going to ask a few of his followers to do something that seems utterly impossible, that to their metrics, their understanding seems completely unreasonable, and they're going to look at Jesus with confusion. Perhaps some of us can relate to that experience. Maybe today you're looking at something and you're saying to God, God, I can't do this. And I would say you might be right. And maybe God is saying, you're right, but I can. The caveat is that for some of us, this is a really, really familiar story. And the difficulty sometimes with familiar stories is that we can kind of just gloss over them because they're so familiar. And if this story is not familiar to you, I'm so glad that you're here today, because I think we're gonna get a glimpse of the heart and character of Jesus in a way that is really, really profound. We're in week 3 of a series we're calling Jesus and the Table. And what we've been saying each week is this, that Christianity didn't take shape behind pulpits or on altars or in books. It took shape around tables. One of the most controversial parts of Jesus' ministry was who he ate with, the tables that he sat at. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke in particular, Jesus is either at a meal, leaving a meal, going to a meal, or making a meal. And if you read the Gospel of Luke without getting hungry, you're probably not reading it well. So we're spending a couple of months exploring some of Jesus' table manners, the stories that he told, and the people that he ate with. So today's text begins in Luke chapter 9, verse 10. It says, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it, and they followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Okay, so a little bit of context. Earlier in Luke's gospel, Jesus gave the disciples, quote, power and authority, and then he sends them out. He sends them out not only to perform healings, but to proclaim the kingdom of God, to proclaim good news. And so I imagine they're like eager to give the report back to Jesus. They're returning back to Jesus, who had sent them out, and like amazing things have happened. So they're really excited to, kind of update him what had happened. Jesus also has just learned that his friend and cousin John the Baptist has been beheaded. So there's an interesting kind of emotional dynamic here. He's just heard this tragic news about his friend, but also his disciples are returning to kind of report all that God had done in them and through them. And so he tries to retreat, and you see this in Jesus' ministry a number of times, but the crowd just follows him. And the crowd's getting bigger and bigger, and people want to see this rabbi, this miracle-working rabbi. And what I love about the Gospel of Luke in particular says that he welcomed them. This is the language of hospitality. He welcomed them. Even with everything else that was going on, he saw these crowds pushing in, and Jesus welcomed them. Matthew's parallel account includes this detail. Matthew 14, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had, what's the word? Compassion on them and healed their sick. I love that. With everything else that was going on, Jesus' heart still had compassion for the crowds that had gathered. There's an English scholar named N.T. Wright, and he says it this way. He says, before the outward and visible works of power, healing the sick, and the miracle of the feeding, comes the inward and invisible work of power in which Jesus transforms his own feelings into love for those in need. So this isn't the main point of the text, but I do want to say a quick word about compassion. I feel like that's in short supply right now. And I would say it this way. When compassion becomes suspect, viewed as an expression of weakness or a lack of conviction, I think we lose touch with the heart of Jesus. Jesus was, I would argue, fully aware of the sin and brokenness embodied by the crowds, but he always looked at them with compassion. How are we stewarding compassion for the person that we disagree with, that we don't know anything about, that we've kind of decided our opinion of them and for them? It's one thing, though, to have compassion. It's another thing to welcome. And so Luke tells us that Jesus welcomes them. The story goes on, verse 12. Late in the afternoon, and that's important, the 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away so that they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging because we are in a remote place. So again, this is like conjecture, but this is like, I imagine the disciples giving Jesus like the signal. Anyone know what I'm talking about? For some context, I'm introverted. My wife is very introverted. And so when we were first married, there were a couple of things I had to learn about the signal. Like we'd be at a party and she would say, hey, I think we need to get going. In my mind, that meant, okay, begin making the rounds, saying goodbye, and in an hour or so, we'll get going. Where are my introverts, by the way? Who are my, yeah. How many of you know that's not what she meant? When my wife says, hey, we should get going, it's like the car's running. Like, it's time, it's time to go. So the disciples kind of give Jesus like the signal, like it's time, wrap this up. And this is conjecture, but I wonder if they were even like a little bit annoyed. Like they're telling Jesus what to do, which I'm sure none of us have ever done, right? We've never actually had the audacity to tell Jesus what, certainly not, okay, just me, all right. Either way, I think their disposition is worth noting before we get into the meat of the text. It's like they're saying, hey, we've been at this for a while. There are way too many people here. And they won't leave unless you tell them to. So, wrap it up. Now, God often moves in Scripture by backing us up against a wall first. I think of the story of the parting of the Red Sea, right? He backs us into what seems to be an impossible circumstance before he does something incredible. Pay attention to those moments in your life where you feel like you are at your end. When there is no possible solution, when you're about to hit your boiling point or breaking point. And technically, and it's worth noting, the disciples are not wrong, right? Yeah, too many people. Yes, we are in a remote place. There is no solution. They're taking the circumstance at face value, which is what many of us are tempted all day, every day to do, to take circumstances at face value. And here's how Jesus responds in verse 13. He replied, you give them something to eat. I don't know if that was the tone, but wouldn't that be fun if it was? You feed them. What am I supposed to do with that? Jesus says, no, they don't have to go anywhere. You feed them. How confused must the disciples have been when they heard this? Like, excuse me, did I hear you correctly? That does not seem feasible at all. Here's how the story goes on. They answered, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for this crowd, which was about 5,000 men. That's just the men, by the way, so the crowd was much larger than only 5,000 people. They're saying, this is all we have, Jesus. You can hear their protest, right? Like there's not even a how would we do that, Jesus? It's no, we don't, that's not feasible. We do not have enough resources. It's clear that what they have is not enough. Have you ever been in a place like that? It's clear, God, what I have. Network, status, resources, square footage, whatever it is. God, it's clear that what I have is not enough. Jesus places a demand on them that is honestly beyond their capacity and resources. And this is another thing that is easy for us to overlook because, we only have a half hour together each Sunday to actually dive into the Word. But at this point, Jesus has done some pretty incredible things that they have witnessed. They've seen Jesus do remarkable things, and yet they're still so limited in their thinking. They've watched him do the miraculous, and yet they're in this moment, and they're saying, no, there's no way here. And honestly, maybe it was just the simplicity of the need. Right? If you've seen someone like raise people from the dead, or walk on water, perform like these really dramatic like outward acts, like feeding people almost feels like beneath him, right? Maybe it was the simplicity of the need. Maybe it was their own hunger. Maybe they're just hangry at this point. Like, wrap it up, Jesus. Send them away. Maybe, honestly, maybe they simply didn't want to. Maybe they're just tired. Either way, here's what happens next. But he said to the disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. Now, there's a couple of depictions that I've seen where, like, they bring this food to Jesus, and Jesus lifts it to heaven, and then the camera kind of pans up, you know what I'm talking about? And then it comes back down, and there's just all these baskets of food. Anyone ever seen that version? With respect to whoever did that, I don't think that's what happened. Because as far as we know, the crowd didn't react at all. There's no like, oh, there's no, I don't know how you would write that in the text. And the crowd went, oh. Either way, this is one of the only miracles that's recorded in all 4 of the Gospels, and we're not given any indication that there's like some sort of uproarious applause. Which means that sometimes the miracles are instantaneous and sometimes they're in process. Sometimes I've heard stories of people that have been like prayed for an addiction to go away, and one day they woke up and like cigarettes just tasted bad to them after 60 years. I have seen that. I've also seen that often the miracles are much more in process. In fact, the crowd might not have even been aware that this is all that they were working with. That all we had were a couple of loaves and fish. Is it possible that maybe you're in the midst of a miracle right now and you're not aware of it? You're not aware of what God is doing behind the scenes, beneath the surface. Now note that the disciples are not asked to dream up some amazing strategy or clever tactic. They were simply asked to give what they have, to surrender what they actually have, and now dinner is served. Just to kind of put it into context, right? I don't have loaves and fish, but I do have hot dogs and hot dog buns. Right? So just a couple of these. This is not historically accurate, by the way. And then this guy, that does not smell great. Although come in the PMs, and you can get one of these. Not this one. That's gross. Imagine. I don't want to hold these. That's going to become a gift real quickly. Imagine coming to Jesus, looking at the crowds, thousands of people, and you're like, here's what we have. So obviously that's not enough, right? And Jesus says, give it to me. I don't know what in your life right now you feel like, this is all I have, God. It's enough in the hands of Jesus. However small it may feel to you, however meager, however insignificant, it is more than enough in the hands of God. The fact that they're divided into 50, I think is really interesting. It's not like, oh, you need to now go serve and love the entire world. But maybe there's a context that God has placed you in. A neighborhood, a family, a workplace. What are maybe even the 50 that you're responsible for inviting to the table? You don't have to invite the whole world, but who is in your world? Now in Matthew it says that Jesus directed them to sit down. In the Greek it actually reads like a command, to sit or lay down. It's a position that you would take at a banquet. And that becomes really important in a second, I'll explain why. But here Jesus shows both authority and hospitality. And he invites the disciples to not only receive the meal, but to participate in the miracle. I would say it another way. Sometimes the miracle is on the other side of ordinary obedience. He says, give me what you have. Now distribute. As far as we can tell, nothing big or dramatic or flashy has happened yet. The miracle actually is in them obeying Jesus, in them following through with what I imagine must have felt ridiculous. Like, can we just humanize the moment for a second? Like, you're looking at thousands of people, and Jesus says, bring me whatever lunch we have here. And then he says, okay, pass it out. If you're a disciple and you're as immature as I am, are you not giggling a little bit? Like looking at each other like, what? Okay, there's a crumb for you and a crumb. What are you thinking in that moment? Sometimes the miracle is on the other side of ordinary obedience, saying, all right, Jesus, I don't know what that looks like. I have no idea how this is going to pan out. But this is a new category of miracle for them. He does something through them. And the primary way that Jesus often works is through his people, through his church. If you're just sitting back with arms crossed waiting for God to act, that might be the thing that's actually preventing you. Maybe he didn't come simply to do miracles, but to include them in it. He uses his followers to facilitate his meals. How often do we miss opportunities to set tables so that others can share a meal with Jesus because we simply don't think they belong? Or that I don't have enough resources to actually adequately provide. Maybe you're thinking, my meager gift can't do much. I'd say that's probably true as long as it remains in your hands. It isn't enough as long as you're holding on to it. But when you hand something over to God, he has the capacity to multiply it. Said another way, God can do more with your surrender than you can with your control. He can do more with your meager say, I don't know if this is enough. I don't know if this will make a difference. He can do way more with surrender, with your surrender, than you can with control. I remember when I was first learning guitar, and learning should be in quotes because that's stretching. And I bought a really terrible guitar, and it was real cheap. And I remember like trying to learn, and nothing sounded good. And I just kept blaming the guitar. And I was like, that's just a stupid, crappy guitar. That's why. Like, if it was a great guitar, this would be amazing. And so one day, a buddy of mine came over to the house who'd been playing guitar for like 12 years. And he didn't know that I'd been struggling. He just kind of like picked it up and just like full Santana. And it sounded beautiful. And I realized, oh, it wasn't the guitar. That guitar sounds different in your hands. Your gifts look different in God's hands. Your resources do different things. God multiplies whatever meager gifts that we bring when we surrender. And here's maybe my favorite part of the whole story in verse 17. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Now, we tend to think 12 disciples, and I think that's part of it. I think this first audience, though, they would have thought 12 tribes of Israel. Either way, the message is clear. God takes care of his people. He provides for his people. And notice this, they didn't just simply eat enough to curb the appetite. That would have been miraculous enough if the text was like, and they all had just enough to make their stomach stop growling. That's not what happens. What happens is abundance. They were satisfied. This is a picture of radical kingdom generosity. It's not only a picture of provision, but abundance, which means that even after you pour out, there's still more. Said another way, that even in times of scarcity, we can trust God's abundance. I don't know what area of your life feels like scarcity right now, and that may be legitimate. You might be like the disciples saying, this is not enough to accomplish the job. Even in our seasons of scarcity, we can trust God's abundance. Now, most people kind of stop the story here, but I actually think there's more going on. The disciples in this story, I think, are meant to invite us more deeply into this story. Because here they are, kind of at the end of themselves. They've been doing good work, by the way. Let's remember what the disciples are returning from. They're returning from ministry. They've been preaching and healing and proclaiming, like they're doing good things. They've been serving and loving, and then this need arises. And I wonder if they're thinking, one more thing. When do I get a break? The need probably didn't feel all that extravagant to them. Just send them home. We can reconvene tomorrow, that's fine. But Jesus is calling them to more, even when they didn't know what to do next. So I want to issue kind of 3 invitations for us as we think about the table in particular. And what does it look like to be a people of the table? First is this, an invitation to humanity. For some reason, Jesus does not seem put off by their doubt or their frustration or their inability to see what he sees. He doesn't expect them to pull it together, man. Believe as I believe. Instead, he embraces where we are at. He doesn't coddle and he doesn't patronize, but he also does not rebuke them for their humanity. Their legitimate questioning of like, how would we do this? How, Jesus? Commentators note that the other gospel writers put this feeding account later in the story to emphasize Jesus' ability to provide, but Luke puts it earlier where the disciples are asked to feed the crowd to emphasize their inability to provide. And in case no one has told you recently, you have limits. You are human. Maybe that's just a reminder for me. Like anyone else in the like I'll sleep when I'm dead category, right? You think you can do it all the time for everyone, always. You have limits. That's not an excuse for disobedience or for sin, but there's a healthy reality to consider that there are limits to our perspectives. He is on the throne. We are not. You can't, but he can. My guess is that the disciples couldn't have even imagined the miracle that would take place, but by simply offering what they had, limits and all, they didn't only witness a miracle, they walked in it. They got to participate in it. Thinking about the story from last week, sometimes God multiplies the loaves and fish, and sometimes he allows the jar of perfume to be wasted. Both are worship. Whether he multiplies or he allows what seemingly looks like a waste. God's job is outcomes. Our job is obedience. His job is outcomes. Some of us are so outcome driven that we feel like we need to be in control of the metrics. His job is the outcomes. Ours is obedience. Put another way, God's job is results. Our job is response. It's to say, okay, you got a couple of loaves, a few fish, bring it. Fruitfulness is God's responsibility. Faithfulness is ours. It is not your responsibility to save everyone in your family or on your block or at your job. It is your responsibility to be faithful with whatever he's given you. So maybe today, maybe like the disciples, you're saying these same words, we have only. I just think that's such an honest response to Jesus. This is all we have. What is that we have only for you? Is it a dollar amount? Is it spare time? Is it resources? Is it mental energy? Is it social energy? Is it acumen? Is it pedigree? Is it training? Is it experience? What is it for you that you're saying to God, we have only, I have only? What would it look like to trust that God could do more with whatever we think is only than we ever possibly could? Identify it, relinquish it to God, maybe for the first time, maybe for the 100th time. Second invitation is an invitation to humility. Humility happens when we accept our humanity and allow it to change how we view the world. We see this when they begin to pass out the food, right? Again, what were they thinking when Jesus said, okay, have at it. Couple of loaves and fish. You got this. But something happens when we yield to Jesus and his invitation and his perspective. I say this with all the love in the world. So many of us are way too confident that we know what God is capable of. Some of us have decided in our minds, God could never break through that heart. God could never restore this relationship. God could never come through in this or that. In my ego, personally, I love to give God lists. Anyone else? Like so often my prayers read more like a grocery list. Hey God, if you could just do this, 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 and this. Thanks so much. Same time tomorrow. When we cling with clenched fists to our way, our perspective, we run the risk of forfeiting a front row seat to what God is doing all around us. Don't say God's no for him. Some of us, maybe we've not seen a miracle in our life because we've refused to ask. We refuse to allow our hearts to hope again. Don't say God's no for him. And then third, an invitation to harvest. What is so fascinating to me about this story is that we don't actually know that the miracle has happened until the food is in the hands of the disciples. Something happens between Jesus breaking the bread and them passing it out. they're invited into the miracle. What I really love, and this has been resonating with me this week, what I love about this story is that it doesn't require the disciples getting out of the way for Jesus to work. Like quite the opposite. He invites them in all of their insecurity, all of their brokenness, all of their sin to participate in a miracle. Even in their fatigue, even in their doubt, they're invited in. Not to like muster what they don't have or to manufacture energy, but to simply bring what they have. What you have is enough in the hands of Jesus. But also we give away what he blesses. We give away what he blesses. We give away what he blesses because everything that we have to give has been given to us by God in the first place. Everything that we have is a gift on loan to us to steward in the world. C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity, he said, every faculty you have, your power of thinking or of moving, your limbs from moment to moment is given to you by God. If you devoted every moment of your whole life exclusively to his service, you could not give him anything that was not in a sense his own already. So that when we talk of a man doing anything for God or giving anything to God, I will tell you what that really is like. It's like a small child going to his father and saying, Daddy, give me 6 pence to buy you a birthday present. Of course, the father does, and he's pleased with the child's present. It's all very nice and proper, but only an idiot would think that the father is 6 pence to the good on the transaction. When a man has made these two discoveries, God can really get to work. It is after this that real life begins. The man is awake now. When we recognize, man, every good thing that we have, it's his to begin with. How could we possibly justify hoarding when a God of this kind of extravagance says, I invite you to participate. I include you in it. We all have temptations to hoard, but that's not how life in the kingdom works. And I want us to sit with this as we wrap, I want us to sit with the picture of them gathering these baskets afterwards. I don't know about you, I would have been like a little kid. I'm like, are you seeing this? How? How in the world? Who could have even seen this coming? God is not a God who merely provides enough. He provides more than we could hope, dream, or imagine. This is a glimpse of a kingdom of abundance. We desperately need a theology of leftovers, not of scraping by, just enough. This is the posture we take when we set the table for our families, for our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, because we're invited to the same table. And so as his followers, we pray, again, at this table as it is in heaven. God, if your kingdom is a kingdom of abundance, what does that look like here? At my table, at your table, at whatever table we sit at. And maybe you feel like all you have are meager provisions. And I'll be honest, like I'm there a lot. God, how could you ever use someone like me? God invites us to bring whatever we have, to participate in what he's doing, and he wastes nothing. He wastes nothing. One commentator says it this way: the miraculous feeding of the multitudes was a short-term solution. The upside-down alternative for Jesus was to offer himself as the permanent bread of life. From this point in Luke, the direction changes literally. All the action in chapters 1 through 9 take place in Galilee, but from here on out, we begin heading toward the cross. And this open-air, large-scale meal is the climax of part 1. Jesus is the Christ. The rest of the gospel spells out what it means for Jesus to be the Christ and what it means to actually follow Christ. He's the Christ who must die, and to follow him means a life of death to self and service to others. So that means, in the kingdom of God, Jesus invites us to build bigger tables, not higher fences. To build bigger and longer and wider and more expansive tables, to invite people to the table. This is what we see in the ministry of Jesus. His kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven means that sometimes even he invites his betrayer to the table, which shows us that who we're to love has nothing to do with whether or not we think they deserve it. We love because he first loved us. And the truth is that Jesus is the real meal. He is what we need and what we long for. What have you been hungering for? Is it peace? Is it purpose? Is it acceptance? Is it love? Is it meaning? Jesus meets us there and provides in abundance.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us on our YouTube channel today. I hope that you felt the welcome home of Christ right through your screen. Here we believe that the gospel is good news worth sharing. So if you'd like to share this stream with your friends and family, you can also subscribe to this channel and you can use @BridgeChurchTN. Also, if you'd like to give, there's a link in the description there you can click and it'll walk you through all the steps. And if you'd like to stay connected with us, you can simply head on over to bridge.tv. Hope to see you again soon.